Dr. Weston A. Price was a Canadian-born dentist who became a mad researcher, traveled around the world, studied people's mouth, and correlated dental health with physical health and physical health with diet and nutrition, and made a bunch of very interesting observations using the scientific method. And here's what he discovered is the communities and cultures he visited who relied primarily on grains, so let's think of wheat and corn and rice, they tended to have poor dental health and poorer overall health than the communities that relied specifically on higher fat and higher protein animal-based foods. So as you can imagine, the Weston Price's work has been very influential in the paleo communities and in the low-carb, high-fat movements, the keto movements, the Atkins diet, all these kinds of things. I don't really think that's a natural connection to draw. I think people get way too focused on what they're eating and not focused enough on how to eat. I really like Weston Price's work because it's kind of thinking about systems. It's thinking about, on a macro level, what's happening in these communities where people are healthy, what's happening in the communities where they're not. I don't think adding an ism to any of this is really helpful, whether it's paleoism or veganism. I don't think you learn anything with dogma and belief systems. I think where you learn something is by pulling back and looking at the big picture, and rather than asking what people are eating, ask how they're eating. What is the macro picture? What does their nutrient breakdown look like? And from that perspective, I think you can learn a lot. In fact, the raw foodists claim that Weston Price proved their case, and the vegans say that Weston Price proved their stuff, and of course the paleo and the CrossFit people as well. So this week, I'd encourage you two things. My encouragement for you is, if you haven't, dig into a little bit of Weston Price's work, westonprice.org. You can check out, there's quite a bit of resources online. Listen to this particular interview with an open ear, because you'll get some new ideas, perhaps some radical ideas, and then do your own research and draw your own conclusions, because that's really what we're all here for, is just to learn and grow and hopefully improve our health. Thanks so much for listening. As always, your questions, comments, and feedback are most welcome. You can email me, podcast@yogabody.com. So hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. Today's show is called Traditional versus Alternative Medicine, and I am joined here with Dr. Thomas Cowan. Dr. Cowan served as the Vice President of the Physicians Association for Anthroposophical Medicine and is a founding member of the Weston Price A Foundation. He's the principal author of the book, The Fourfold Path to Healing, and the co-author of the Nourishing Traditions Book of Baby and Child Care. He writes the Ask the Doctor column for Wise Traditions in Food Farming and Healing Arts. He's lectured all throughout North America and Canada. He's got a bunch of websites we'll link up to, but while we're listening, you can go to fourfoldhealing.com.
Thank you, and Tom is better than Thomas.
Tom is easier for me as well. So,
Great.
Anthroposophical Medicine, this is a tongue twister for me. This is a new one to me. I've certainly heard of Weston A. Price's work, and I certainly have an idea about what this is about, and then I started digging into this, and I realized I have no idea what this is. This is a totally different approach. So, the title of our show is Traditional versus Alternative Medicine, and you have your feet pretty planted in both sides. So can we start off with just a basic definition? I know this has been a foundational part of your work.
Anthroposophical medicine just refers to the medicine inaugurated by Rudolf Steiner, and he was the guy who started biodynamic agriculture and Waldorf schools, and he wanted to imbue medicine with a deeper understanding, because the fundamental problem with our biology is that we don't distinguish between life and non-life. We study living things as if they were dead things. This actually started with Descartes, believe it or not, who said that we only can, the only laws that apply to living beings must be the laws that apply to mechanics. And so that became basically what we've done ever since, more or less. And so we don't know the difference between a living thing and a dead thing, and Steiner attempted to bring the science of studying life into medicine. That became anthroposophical medicine, with the whole pharmacopoeia and strategy, and there's public hospitals in Europe where all the doctors have to be trained in anthroposophical medicine. So it's been one of the most successful different approaches to medicine probably ever, or at least in the modern era.
And just for the layman, what is the difference in approach if they were to go to a European hospital like this, or if they were to work with you on a fundamental brass tacks level? How does that break down in terms of patient care?
So the way it breaks down into patient care, I can give you an example. So it's an attempt to understand the difference in I mean, there's a lot of differences, but one of them is the difference between the disease and the response. So if you, for instance, have a splinter in your finger and you don't take it out, most people, they'll make pus, which is the therapeutic response to the splinter. Now, in medical school, because of the way it's taught, we're taught pus means infection, means bad, means kill it. So a conventionally trained doctor would give the person an antibiotic. Maybe not in that exact case, but just hear me out for a minute. So the problem, of course, is everybody realizes that the splinter is actually the therapy. I mean, the pus is the therapy for the splinter. And just because there's an, in quote, infection doesn't mean that has to be what one addresses the therapy about. So in anthroposophical medicine, we understand that, and we would work with the pus to help it do its job, which is to get the splinter out. Now, the consequences of not understanding that properly, the splinter example is a very simple one, but and some people would say, well, yeah, but no doctor would make that mistake. But how about this one? So if somebody puts debris in their lungs, either by breathing it or smoking it, and that's like putting splinters in your lungs. So the inevitable consequence of that is your body will make a therapeutic attempt to cough that debris out of your lungs. We are trained in conventional medicine to call that bronchitis. There is inflammation in the lungs, that's true, but the inflammation of the lungs is a therapeutic attempt to get the debris that you advertently or inadvertently put into your lungs. So at least 1,000 or 100,000 or 10,000 times every day across the world and in the country, people put debris in their lungs, they go to the doctor, they get told they have bronchitis, and they get a medicine to stop the bronchitis. What happens because of the failure of understanding of the doctor is you end up with a bunch of people with debris in their lungs. Now, I understand this a little too simplistic, but an accumulation of debris in your lungs for 20 years is the genesis of lung cancer. Now, the reason I say that is because there is at least 100 years of research documenting that infections, particularly infections with fevers, are probably the best therapy ever known for treating cancer. This goes back to Coley's toxins and hyperthermia and sweat lodges. It's the basis of all natural medicine. So to make that misunderstanding between the therapy and the disease is a crucial and dramatic and fatal mistake, one which is made by doctors every single day in every office around the country. I would just finish by saying this therapeutic attempt of fevers and cough and mucus and all the things we call being sick is not a way that the body cleanses itself of debris. It's the way. There is no other way. There is no food or anything that you can eat that gets it out. The body is designed in a very specific way because it has these, life forces, so to speak, that work through warmth and production of mucus. One has to understand that if you want to achieve, if you want to prevent chronic illness. There's no other way. There's no side road that you can go down. That's the way.
I own and operate yoga studios, and people often pull a hamstring or, tweak their lower back or something. And same kind of thing. People say it's inflamed, and the first thing they want to do is take ibuprofen. And I always just think, that's the body's so smart. It's responding with inflammation, totally intelligent reaction. But I guess The question I have is the same one with this, irritants in the lungs. There's a real fine line between a body's appropriate response and then a runaway response, right? So chronic inflammation in the body can suddenly become an infection in and of itself. That lung irritant can suddenly turn into pneumonia. How is that the art of sort of holistic medicine, or what? How do you think about that?
So here's how to think about that. If the pus in your finger is going to eat away your bone and you're going to get sepsis, which is an infection in the blood, then the job of the doctor is to recognize that this situation has gotten out of control, and then you use an antibiotic. If the debris in your lungs is going to lead you to a potentially fatal case of pneumonia, then anybody with any sense would give them an antibiotic. Now, I've been practicing for 35 years. The amount of times that I've had to do that, because the first thing I say to myself is, I need to use the skill and the expertise that I've developed to help this therapeutic response do its job. So I may give herbs or whatever to help the person expectorate the debris, right? So you do that. You may use compresses. You may do all kinds of things. That's not really the point. The point is, the first thing you work on is to help the body do what it's already trying to do. The amount of times that I've had to use this thwarting method, or what I would call the protective use of force, is, maybe 10 in 35 years. So does it come up? Sure. To base a whole medical system based on the fact that it might in, Joe Blow who's 90 and debilitated, I mean, maybe, but not everybody is going to die from their cough. Unfortunately, we make them believe they are, which is good for business, I think, but it's not necessarily good for the health of the people.
I guess in doctors' defense, a lot of them are working with 7-minute time frames, and they're working with real financial constraints, and they just have to kind of rock and roll and get patients in and out. And I guess they're worried about liability too, like if they send somebody out the door and then it develops into pneumonia. Am I off base there? Is it systemic?
Yeah, that's not a defense. That's an excuse. There's a difference, and that's so. The problem then is that's a political question and an economic question.
Yeah.
And as far as I can, explain myself, I'm not a politician or an economist.
Sure.
I'm a doctor, and so to make an excuse for myself, well, I did the wrong thing here, which is going to have a negative impact on this person's life because of such and such. Fine, but that's kind of ridiculous. Why do we have a system like that?
I wanted to touch on Weston Price's work as well, because I know that's been another big influence on you, and it's something we never chatted about here on the show. And we've talked about all kinds of different things, so it's the first time it's come up, and it's such a big influence in so many of the paleo movement, a lot of the different movements that are happening right now. Can you give us a little backstory on how that work has and continues to influence your work now?
I'm always confronted with people who have, not always, but sometimes, I don't want to exaggerate that, but sometimes people have theories about the way it's supposed to work. In other words, I think, not I, but somebody thinks, humans should only eat vegan food, or humans should only eat raw food, or humans should only eat food that's cooked with Bunsen burners, or humans should only walk backwards, or humans should stand on their head for most of the day, and humans should write with their feet and not with their hands. Fine, I'm all for freedom, but the problem is, if you say that, can you demonstrate that a viable human culture has done that, walked backwards only, and had, successful long lives and were sustainable over hundreds and thousands of years? And as far as I can see, especially when it comes to food, so this guy Weston Price goes around the world, and he's a dentist and a researcher, and the good thing about being a dentist, which I don't know that there's many good things about it, but one of them is it's pretty easy to tell who has perfect health and who doesn't. I mean, if you're a gastroenterologist and you want to know who has a perfect liver, it's pretty hard to tell just by looking at somebody. But if you're a dentist, you can say you're supposed to have 32 teeth. They're all supposed to be perfectly straight. You're never supposed to lose one in your entire life due to, decay or disease. I guess you could get smacked in the mouth, but that's different. And you're not supposed to have caries. So you can go around the world and see if you can find people who meet that criteria. And he did. He did that for decades. He found 14 groups. They all had very low incidence, as far as anybody could tell, of any of the other diseases. So it turns out that having perfect teeth, which is, easy to see, you just open the mouth and you can count it, then that was also sort of a surrogate market for absence of heart disease and tuberculosis and cancer and a lot of other things. And so he found them, and he found out that they all ate the same diet. Of course, in order to say they ate the same diet, you have to understand food groups. In other words, there's a food group called animal foods. So eating, full-fat, cultured, grass-fed dairy products, raw or cultured, is the same as eating, wild seafood or grass-fed meat or kangaroos or insects or any other animal food. They have the same kind of protein, fat, not exactly, but, more or less. So that's one food group. And there was no group who made it into his book that didn't eat animal foods. So when people say the vegan diet, for instance, I don't mean to pick on vegans necessarily, but is the way that humans should eat, I say, well, how do you know? Who did that and how did they do? The answer is nobody did that. We don't know how it would work out. And maybe one of the reasons it didn't work out, or there wasn't groups like that, is because it didn't work. And anybody who, tried it just died out. I mean, this came up in a recent debate between a vegan cardiologist and a paleo he wasn't a cardiologist, but paleo researcher. And the vegan cardiologist goes on with this elegant description of how in the 1920s in the United States there was no heart disease. It started in the 1940s with the change in the food supply. And then he went on to say that we should all be vegans to prevent heart disease. The question then should have been, well, how many vegans were there in 1920? And the answer is none, at least none voluntarily. There may have been some poor people who had no choice, but there was none. So how is it possible that the very diet that they were eating, and maybe it isn't all diet, but at least if you're talking about diet, the very diet that they were eating produced the absence of this disease? How is it possible that eating a different diet than that is the solution when the solution had already been found?
Yeah, the arguments in the plant-based community are really antiquated and kind of backwards. And the one challenge that I have, though, is the other side gets equally crazy, trying to describe us as cavemen and, the Paleolithic movement and these kinds of things. And I guess I don't get so, the isms, whether it's a veganism or a macrobiotic, whatever it is, I just find that less and less interesting these days. Especially because I currently live in Spain, and we have the second highest longevity rate in the world, just after Japan. And it's really kind of remarkable. In the U.S., people glorify the Mediterranean diet, and they think there's magical things happening here. And there's really not. There's a lot of like fried potatoes and processed foods. And I actually think it has, at least here, from what I've seen, anecdotally, I've been here for 9 years, I haven't seen a lot of healthy food. I've just seen a lot of healthy lifestyles, really low stress levels, and pretty active lifestyles. And I almost think it makes up for what I would classify as like a pretty uninteresting diet. I mean, of course, there's the prevalence of olive oil, which is pretty significant considering the U.S. is living off of, PUFA oils and things like this. But so for me, the debate like paleo, vegan, 1920s, it's like, well, right now today, I'm living in a country that's lived longer than anyone in human history, as far as I know, just about capping out at 80 years. And so maybe it's much more interesting just to look at macro things rather than trying to drill down. Is it a kangaroo, or is it a factory farm chicken? Is it an organic piece of kale, or is it a grass-fed butter? These kinds of like little micro arguments. I just don't know that there's any long-term socioeconomic benefits to these. How do you think about these in terms of, because a lot of your work is based on older work and older research and these models as well?
Well, I don't know the particulars of the situation in Spain. My guess is they have a significant amount of chronic disease. I don't know that for sure. They may live, long, but they interestingly, they don't live that much longer than the people that Price studied. In fact, I don't know that they live any longer. The difference is, my guess is the people in Spain have a pretty high burden of chronic disease. Again, I don't know the situation in Spain, so I could be wrong. And if the argument that you're trying to make is there's something okay about feeding cows food that cows are not supposed to eat, and that somehow it's okay to eat animals that are sick, I would have a hard time buying that. I don't think that eating sick animals, for instance, or sick carrots, if you put a carrot in a field of glyphosate, you're going to end up with a sick carrot. I don't see how that is a good strategy either personally or economically or environmentally or any other way that you can imagine. So I sometimes say to people, especially related to sort of grass-fed animals, because the interesting argument about that, one of them is that we need to be all plant-based to save the world ecologically. The reality, of course, and for those people, I point out that when the first white people arrived in the U.S. on the plains in 1800s, the topsoil was about 12 feet deep, and it was the richest, best soil in the history of the world on anywhere on the planet. And the reason for that was because there was hundreds of millions of herbivores grazing on the plains. And so essentially the people living there harvested the herbivores and whatever else was growing on the plains, and that's how they ate, and they had an incredibly healthy lifestyle, an incredibly sustainable system, and were replenishing the soil more and more as time went on, improving the soil. So then what happened is they took that situation, plowed up the plains, planted annual crops, meaning mostly wheat, and the whole thing became a dust bowl and blew away into the Gulf of Mexico. And now we have basically toxic plains with hard pan topsoil and a polluted water system that pretty soon will not be able to sustain life. And that happened because we switched the diet from a sustainable, basically herbivore, we eat herbivore based diet to a plant-based annual crop diet. And that's what always happens. That's what happened in Mesopotamia that ended up being a diet. So if Spain or anywhere else wants to try that out again and see what happens, I mean, it's up to them, I guess. But I can tell them what's going to happen is they will end up creating a dust bowl. I don't think that's a good idea.
Looking back at history, we can learn a lot of lessons, and certainly there's no more buffalo, and there's no, the millions of wild horses are gone, and that 12 feet of topsoil is gone. But, at least half this agriculture is going to feed animals, so the monocrops are not the solution. The animals are not the solution. I guess, the best years have gone by. I just don't really know what to do with that going forward. We're at 7.5 billion. Let's say in my lifetime we'll get to 9 billion. What with the modern constraints we have, I love the idea of being on the prairie with enough animals to go around and wild buffalo and topsoil, but we kind of don't have it, and so that's why I guess this is where I get really conflicted thinking about traditional medicine, natural medicine, conventional
but
medicine.
Excuse me, but there is no conflict. Here's why there's no conflict. And this has been proven over and over again, if you take the nutrient content of 1 acre of traditional prairie land, in other words, like snapshot, traditional 1850 prairie land, it has 3 buffalo, 6 rabbits, this kind of grasses, these berries, etc., right? So you take that and you measure the nutrient content of that, and you have that on one side. And then you take that same acre and you plow it up, because we have to feed the world, we have to feed 7 billion people, you have to have conventional agriculture to do that. So we plow that up and we plant wheat. Now, you do a nutrient analysis of the wheat, and interestingly, every single nutrient, every mineral, every protein, every vitamin, every anthocyanin, every single nutrient you can measure is lower in the wheat than it is in the traditional prairie land, with one exception. The one exception is carbohydrates, i.e. sugar. So essentially, what you're talking about, I'm not sure you're talking about this, but this argument that we can't feed the world with conventional, with traditional agriculture or traditional agricultural practices, that we need modern, conventional agriculture. Every single nutrient goes down except carbohydrates, meaning the people will all eventually become diabetic. That is the inevitable consequence of this. So there is no choice. Now, again, that may become a political and transportation and economic issue as to how you make this work. But to fool oneself and to think somehow there's a sustainable approach out there based on this conventional model of agriculture and diet, I think is ludicrous. To me, there's no conflict. There's just questions to be solved as far as, distribution and all that, which is political questions mostly.
Completely agree. I mean, this is how the world has scaled to where we are. People always think of the cruelest, the cruelest of industries being the animal industry. I always say that nothing is more cruel than wheat. Grains fueled everything. Every battle, every war, everything has been fueled by grains. It's what has allowed the population to explode. It's what has really allowed all of this to happen. We don't need more carbohydrates, but at the same time, we do, because I don't want my kids to starve, and you don't want your kids to starve. So it's an easy thing to point the finger at, not really an easy thing to unpack and solve, because that carbohydrate sparse piece of land that's nutrient dense, but carbohydrate sparse, it doesn't feed us. So I don't really know that that's a solution, but it's a great question that you bring up. For people who are trying to toe the line, for many of our listeners, for example, people who might think of themselves as moderates in terms of health, and they maybe shop at Whole Foods, but they have an allopathic medical doctor, how can you just help people try to get in touch with traditional foods? You mentioned herbs earlier. I know that you have an extensive background in both allopathic and holistic medicine. How can you help people just kind of, dip their toe in the water and make the best use of both worlds?
I would say for that person, it all comes down to results. In other words, if they're a whatever age person and perfectly healthy, then they should have no quarrel, and they should have no motivation to do anything differently. However, if they're one of the, say, 40 million people, at least in the U.S., who suffers from Hashimoto's, then the problem is, if they're being treated in the conventional, i.e. normal way with thyroid, the problem is Hashimoto's is not a thyroid disease. It's an immunologically based disease that affects your thyroid, which is different. Just like rheumatoid arthritis is not a joint disease, it's an immunological disease that affects your joints. And so if they're being treated like that, they will never get better. In fact, the problem with conventional medicine and conventional medicine theory is people never get better from anything. And now that sounds like a bit of a harsh statement, but just think about it. How many people get better from hypertension? Answer, none. They all take hypertension drugs the rest of their life. How many people get better from asthma, meaning they go from having asthma, meaning they have trouble breathing, and they go to somebody and he says, here's the way out of having asthma. You should do this, this, or take this medicine, and then in 6 months, 3 months, 2 years, or whatever, you won't have asthma again. The answer is none. That never happens. How about eczema? Never. How about rheumatoid arthritis? Never. How about food allergies? Never. How about chronic runny nose? Well, that might get better if you just leave it alone. And then try the next step. Go to the doctor and say, look, I'd like to get better. I don't want to have a messed up thyroid the rest of my life. One of two things will happen, depending on the character of the person you ask. Either they'll be derisive and say, that's ridiculous, that doesn't happen in medicine. In other words, nobody gets better from anything. Or, yeah, that would be nice, I wish I knew how to do that, but we don't know how. In the meantime, take thyroid, you'll be fine. The problem is, of course, we know that if you take thyroid for 20, 40 years, you end up with accelerated osteoporosis, meaning it deteriorates your basic infrastructure. Now, if you're okay with that, and if you want to call that person, as you did, moderate, which is not what I would call it, I would call it in a compromised situation, because that's what it is. It's not moderate. It's a situation that is not ideal, and so it's compromised. But if the person is okay with that, that's fine. If they want to explore, is there an avenue? Does anybody even think there's a possibility of recovering my health from this situation? And I would say that, as far as I can tell, I or anybody else doesn't have the answers to how everybody can recover. Right? I would not. I've been around this block enough to know medicine is tough. It's tough to take somebody with asthma or allergies or rheumatoid arthritis or hypertension and get them normal again. I would say that probably 80% of my people who come with high blood pressure never need to take medicines because they can do things that help them recover from that situation. But it's not always the same. It's not that high for Hashimoto's. The difference is I've spent at least 35 years trying to figure out with people how to do that. And again, it doesn't always work. And I guess you could say I blame my lack of insight or understanding for that. It's not their fault. They're just people trying to do the best they can. But my point here is having somebody manage your disease, give you drugs that suppress your symptoms or just keep you in that state, that's not really medicine. That's pharmacological management, which is what I learned. I learned that's how you do it. And if somebody can't breathe, I give them drugs to help them breathe too. I'm not that crazy, maybe I am, but at least I hope not. So that's fine, but that's not really, medicine or healing. That's just management. And do you have to do management? Yes, because people are messed up. But that's not healing. That's management. If somebody wants something more, they have to find it in another way, because doctors don't know about that, and they don't even like it.
Tom, you've got a really unique perspective. You got my mind churning about a bunch of different things. Before we wrap up today, I guess the $1 million question is, these solutions and this approach, I guess my question is, does it work? Does it work for you and your family? Like, are you finding that you and your kids and your family are exceptional, or do you find that you struggle with the same things that the rest of us struggle with, or how is this playing out in an N=1 scenario?
So if you're a doctor of the dolphin, right? So let's say you're not a doctor of people, you're a dolphin doctor. There's at least two factors that play into this. There's, how is the life of this individual dolphin? But at some point, you may have to ask yourself, I wonder how the quality of the ocean or the water or the sea that this dolphin is living in, right? Anybody who doesn't ask that question is somewhere around blind or naive or foolish. Because obviously, the quality of health of the dolphin at least has something to do with the milieu that the dolphin is living in. So if the question is, are we some sort of supermen, the answer is no. Why? Well, nobody has good food anymore, for instance, because all the soil is poisoned, and, we do the best we can. I grow, 90% of our plant food, and I get the other stuff from, people I know or know-ish. I mean, I don't know them all personally, but close enough. But there's some good evidence that living in a 4G Wi-Fi place is probably about the worst thing you could possibly do to your health. So whether or not we even have Wi-Fi in our home, we're exposed to it. We're exposed to the lies and the corruption and the economic insecurity and the banking system, and you name it. And we had, mercury fillings. I did as a child, and it's a crapshoot out here. So, everybody is, I think, trying to do the best they can. What I'm suggesting is health. If you're interested in your health, there's a what you do, and there's the sea that you're living in. The sea that we're living in the United States, anyways, I don't know Spain, but I can't imagine it's that different, is not a healthy situation for anybody. So anybody, people often come to me and say, I can't understand. I do everything perfect. How come I still got sick? And I just shake my head, because there's nothing that's perfect anymore.
It's a great answer, and I suppose there's never been something that was perfect. I mean, even when people were doing really well with their health, I guess the rock fell on their head, or high risk lifestyles,
right.
And things like that. So
life happens.
Do the best we can. Tom, I really appreciate your perspective. Like I said, you've really got me thinking. I'm excited to dig into your books, which I have yet to read. Can you, for people listening who would like to follow you, I know you got a bunch of different projects. Where would you suggest they start in terms of reading, and which website would you point them to, or we can send them to all of them, whichever you prefer?
The two books you mentioned were written, at least over a decade ago. I have two new books published, which are really the clearest exposition, if that's the right word, of how I think. One is called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, where I describe A, that the heart does not pump the blood, and B, coronary artery disease is not the main cause of heart attacks. So I would check that one out. And the second one is on autoimmune disease and its relation to vaccines, called Vaccines, Autoimmunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness. So I would check that one out. I have a third in the series that will come out sometime this year. So those are where I would go. You can get them on the Human Heart website or from Amazon or, those kind of normal places.
Tom, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate what you're doing, and I hope we can stay in touch for the future. If you're a yoga teacher, a Pilates instructor, a group fitness instructor, a personal trainer, and you're looking to grow your business in 2019, I am hosting my popular 21-day private yoga business accelerator in January. This will be our fourth batch of students, And it's just been a huge success. A big part of the success is it's a very simple course. There's a bunch of courses online where you'll spend a year learning the ins and outs of online marketing and pay-per-click and all this crazy stuff that's just too much. It's just too much. It's good information, but it's just too much. Most people that I work with, that I train, that I speak to, they're looking to start working privately. They're looking to replace their income. They're looking to double their teaching income. They want to stop being reliant on local yoga studios or third-party employers, and they want to work for themselves. You can do that very easily right now. This was not the case even 5 years ago, but the on-demand economy has really made it so that private yoga teachers are doing well all over the world. We have hundreds and, well, at this point, over 1,000 graduates doing this really, really well all around the world. It's a 21-day program. Every day I give you a little assignment. It's meant to be about 15 minutes per day. Little, simple things that you can do to get yourself set up. None of it has to do with SEO or online marketing, anything like that. Just very simple structure, strategy, positioning things that will help you meet your goals in the year to come. Really great program. I'd encourage you to check out the website and you can learn more about what some of our past trainees and graduates have been saying. You can go to myyogabusiness.com for more information. Thanks so much for your interest. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question. Listener Kevin says, "Hey Lucas, I know you're not a huge fan of fruit juice anymore, but what do you think of blending fruits so all the fiber is there and it slows down the absorption of the sugars?" When you blend fruit, like let's say you have a strong blender, I have this big Vitamix, it's like a lawnmower in the kitchen, and you can throw anything in there. You can throw, cashews or almonds and it'll turn them into liquid. And you can certainly throw an apple or an orange or a banana in there. It'll turn into total puree very quickly. And so the question is, which is better? Well, it's not really about better or worse. There's nothing wrong with fruit juice. It's just about the quantity. And if you have a typical, 12-ounce glass of orange juice, that might be 5 or 6 oranges. That's a ton of fructose. That's more than your daily intake suggestion for fructose. And that can lead to a whole bunch of problems. It's just these modern fruits, they've been bred for sweetness, not really for nutrients. And so they just get too sweet too fast. That's why generally eat your fruit, drink your vegetables is the way that we look at it in the juicing world. Blending is certainly a better option. Fiber certainly does slow down the absorption of sugars, as does fat. I'll say that again. Fiber and fat slow down the absorption of sugars and starches. So a piece of toast is really high glycemic. It's really high in carbohydrates that turn into blood glucose very, very quickly. If you slather it with a bunch of fat like coconut butter or cow's butter, it slows down the absorption of those sugars. This is why naturally you'll see that starches are often laden with fat, right? Potatoes are often dripping in oil or dripping in butter. That is a natural cooking method to slow down the absorption of those sugars, which is generally positive. We don't want to hit our body with so many sugars so quickly. That said, the effect is not that exciting. So should you eat a bunch of toast and just slather it with butter? I try to just skip the toast and try to get some more vegetables. Not that you can never have toast, but it's not a good thing to try to live off of. Same thing with all these fruits. If you're throwing 5 pieces of fruit in the blender and blending it up for a smoothie, you're still eating 5 pieces of fruit, which if you're eating apples, oranges, bananas, it's pretty high fructose, these things. And usually a couple pieces, you kind of hit your max 25 grams per day fructose levels pretty quickly. So is it better with fiber? Yeah, it'll slow you down. You'll drink slower. You'll absorb it slower. Is it the solution? Not really. I would encourage you to eat your fruit, drink your vegetables, and really throttle your fructose intake. We have a question this week from listener Nish. Nish says, "I have been transitioning to an 8+16 eating window. I find it easy to do 14 hours, but the last 2 hours are hard. I can push myself to do it 5 days a week, but I'm wondering if I should be in gnawing hunger." The answer, Nish, is no. If you're feeling gnawing hunger, that's not a good physiological or psychological state to be in. So if 14 hours is working for you, stay there. For people who are listening who are unfamiliar with this concept, we teach at Yoga Body. It's nothing new, nothing that we've created. It's been around for a really long time, but the research is getting better and better. In 2016, there was a Nobel Prize given for research on fasting and cellular autophagy. Autophagy is when cells are basically cleansed from the body. It's sort of like a natural purification process correlated with longevity. And so there's been more and more research and more writing and press about this than ever before. And anecdotally, you'll just find that it really works for people. How does it work? What happens when you give yourself a break between dinner and breakfast? That's why they call it breakfast, by the way. It's break the fast. When you give yourself a significant break, 12 hours would be a minimum. 14 hours is better. 16 hours if you're trying to affect change really dramatically. What happens is your body becomes more sensitive to some of the really important hormones for fat storage and hunger, specifically insulin, leptin, and ghrelin, among others. Other thing that happens when your body becomes more sensitive to those hormones tends to manage sugar and manage blood glucose a lot better, which means your body is not as good at storing fat. So people tend to lean out. You'll see people's body composition changing without really changing their diet, meaning people will increase lean muscle, reduce body fat. Very often they'll reduce belly fat as well. Human growth hormone tends to go up, which again helps people to put on lean muscle and just feel youthful in general. And systemic inflammation tends to go down, C-reactive protein. Systemic inflammation is a huge problem from both our lifestyle and our food and our environment. And by giving yourself this timed eating window, you give your body a break to essentially cool down. Inflammation, systemic inflammation, is correlated with just about every degenerative disease. So it's a really important thing that you can do for your health. The other reason I like to teach this is because people see and feel things really quickly. Like within a week, they say, wow, I really noticed this. I feel leaner. I look leaner. My energy's better. My appetite's better. Better as in more manageable, more under control. But like Nish is suggesting, you don't want to feel starving. It's not good physiologically or psychologically. That can lead to bad places. So just do the best you can. I always encourage people, just start with the 12-hour turnaround. If your last meal was at 8, wait till at least 8 the next morning before you stick anything in your mouth. This is the simplest concept in the world, but I get dozens of questions every week, and the questions are, but, what about bulletproof coffee? But, what about just an apple? But, what about a banana? What about a walnut? Do whatever you need to do, but if you can have nothing, that's good. Water's fine, but if you can do nothing, that's great. What about lemon in my water? Just nothing. Nothing is good. This is what your body wants, is nothing. Nothing's really helpful. But if you have to have something, then have something. But what we're aiming for is nothing. And you're looking to push that window up, if you can, as it's comfortable, as Nish is suggesting, from 12 hours bump to 14, and especially during reset periods, meaning periods where perhaps you're just not feeling your best, or you're trying to really take care of your health, or you're preparing for a stressful time in your life, or whatever it is. 16-hour window, pretty dramatic changes. You'll notice right away. Hope that's helpful. Thanks, guys.
This week's iTunes review is by Yoga Mama Gwenny Poo from the US. Yoga Mama Gwenny Poo says, I love everything related to Yoga Body Naturals. My yoga trapeze, gymnastic rings, awesome toes, hurt so good massage balls, bamboo handstand blocks, and the excellent Yoga Body tutorials and supplements, just to name a few favorites. But it's Lucas's podcast where I have been inspired, informed, and totally intrigued by every single episode. Whether Lucas is answering questions or hosting an amazing special guest, I have literally been enlightened on a huge variety of subjects and aspects of my health and fitness practices and knowledge. Thank you, Lucas, for this wonderful podcast. Yoga Mama Gwenny Poo, you have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we will ship it to you.
Breathing is one of the fastest and most powerful ways you can affect your nervous system, the pH of your blood, even your endocrine system. It's really dramatic how quickly you can impact your body, but most people don't understand it. If you go to yoga classes, the teacher just says, breathe deeply, breathe slowly. And we don't really understand what that means. I got really frustrated with this, so I put together a guide for you, my podcast listeners. Go to yogabody.com/how to breathe. Yogabody.com/how to breathe. You put in your email, and I'll give you this PDF. It shows you exactly how to do water, whiskey, and coffee breathing. These 3 specific practices, which all breathing falls into one of these 3 categories. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Yogabody.com/how to breathe.